seemingly free from all this because he can't name it. He's internalizing it.
Name what?
Racism. I think your son's tumor was caused by racism.
You need to find a new doctor immediately. Your son is in danger, and it has nothing to do with his tumor.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?
Oh my goodness. That was that's an actual show. An actual media enterprise thought that would be a good idea to put into a script, because I'm sure their writers thought to themselves, this is plausible that racism would cause cancer. Oh my goodness. I just wanted to start us off with something light because I have had a very rough week. I've been down for the count for over 4 days with one of the worst flus I've ever had. I slept for almost 24 hours straight at one point, like 23.5 hours. I know, it doesn't even sound possible, but I did it because I'm just built different. No, seriously though, I was in bed for 2 days and fever, couldn't do anything. So I've been wanting desperately to record an episode. I've been laying in bed thinking about it, but I simply could not bring myself to do it. As you can tell, I'm still quite sick, so I am coming to you as quickly as I possibly can. I had to miss out on Timcast IRL with Dave Smith and Angela McCardle. That was on Wednesday. I was supposed to be there. I was not. I was supposed to then immediately after that fly to New Hampshire to go to Porkfest and do the show live with Luke for 3 days in a row. Skipped all that. I am still sick. I don't think I can fly. I could probably fly tomorrow. I feel like I'll be okay enough to do it then. But I'm still very sick. And then I would have to turn around and fly right back home the next day. So probably not going to do that. So sorry, Porkfest. I did want to come, but it did not work out. And sorry to Luke. I'm sure he's holding down the fort and he's doing a great show. So that's it. We'll set all that aside. Thank you guys so much for tuning back in. This is Liberty Lockdown, and this is Clint Russell. Thank you, as always, for your time and attention. I appreciate it from the very bottom of my heart. Let's get into the news. So the big news over the past week, it became official that the Saudis were going to finally stop selling their oil and gas exclusively in the U.S. dollar, a.k.a. the PetroDollar System is now in tatters. And I'll explain kind of like broad-based why that matters and why it should be concerning and why you may have more time than many of you are probably thinking. So PetroDollar System, after the gold window closed in 1971, thereabouts, it basically, the underlying value of the dollar became that it was going to be transacted. The primary trading vehicle for oil and gas globally was going to be the U.S. dollar. Therefore, that kind of became the underpinning, that it had a tremendous amount of demand for the U.S. dollar. Therefore, you could print a lot of it. It would be exported to the rest of the world. Inflation wouldn't be felt so much domestically. And it has worked fairly well. The problem is that in order to maintain that system, you have to be a semi or somewhat benevolent global hegemon. And the U.S. has demonstrated time and time again that they are incapable of fulfilling that side of the promise, because that is really the unwritten promise that, like, yeah, we're not perfect, but we're better than everybody else, so you'll probably want to trade in our currency because we're going to maintain the value, blah, blah, blah. And we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're printing into oblivion, but even more so, the real shot across the bow to the entire global financial system was the sanction regime levied against Russia. After they invaded Ukraine, it became full nuclear arsenal in economic warfare, trying to essentially break Russia. But what it did was signal to this is my analysis. I don't know if I'm sure there's other people that agree with me, but I'm not like reading this. This is just years of me following this news. And I believe strongly that the rest of these nations, these central bankers, these heads of state, they looked around and they said, okay, well, we can't continue to transact in the dollar. They stole $300 billion from Russia, from their central bank that was deployed in Europe. They just seized that money, and now they are using that money, and they're using the interest on it. And Janet Yellen, which I'll play this clip for you later, Janet Yellen is actually interviewed about this, and she's saying, we're not stealing their money, we're just using the interest. But the the money that comes, or the interest that comes from the money that we've seized, well, that's not theft. It's like, what is it then, Janet? You think that they wouldn't make a return on $300 billion in assets? Of course they would. So you're stealing it. And whether or not you'll actually give back the principal at the end of the day, I have no idea. But the entire game plan at this point is to essentially steal Russia's assets and then use that money, and this is not a joke, to fund Ukraine, to continue to bolster their military, to continue to give them munitions, which they have now authorized the Ukrainians to strike Russia proper. So they are essentially robbing Russia to fund their enemy in striking them domestically. You get it? You understand why that's a big deal? I don't think I need to spell that one out. That's a really big deal. And if you think, regardless of how you feel about the Russia-Ukraine war, regardless of how you feel about Putin or Zelensky or any of that, just put yourself in the shoes of a central banker or the head of state of some other nation around the world. And they look at that and they go, oh, we can't transact in the US dollar anymore. We can't. It's too dangerous. They have now demonstrated that they will do like anything. They will pull out all the stops, galvanizing momentum behind the BRICS alliance, which consists of, as you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and many, many other nations. And now Saudi Arabia has essentially thrown its hat into the ring, saying we will also transact our oil sales in currencies aside from the US dollar. And you may think to yourself, well, the Saudis don't sell enough oil to really undermine that system. And you're right. It's not enough to. But what it does do is it signals to the rest of the world that, okay, like, US dollar ain't the guy anymore. Like, it's not the one. It may be one of, but it ain't the one. And I think that's what the rest of the world is looking at, and they're thinking to themselves, yeah, well, if it's not going to be the one, they all have the same capacity for economic insight that I'm capable of, and they could think to themselves, well, if that's the case, and all of these trillions of US dollars that are floating domestically start to flood home, it could create hyperinflation, which would also create inflationary pressure the world over when it comes to the US dollar. Do we want to be transacting in that? Or should we be looking at the BRICS currency, whatever that ultimately ends up being, because they are alleging that it will be at least somewhat hard asset backed? And I think from my vantage point, it probably makes more sense to either transact in the BRICS currency or Bitcoin or something more solid, gold, going back to the olden times, right? The reason I don't think that it's imminent is because this system has stayed in place for decades and decades. That means that far outside of just oil and gas sales, there has been a major uptick or an uptake of transactions when it comes to putting them in US dollars, like contracts that say, I give you this, you give me these being US dollars. Well, those contracts exist, and they exist for a duration. Some of them are 5 years, some of them are 10 years, some of them are 20 or 30. Some of them are 1 year or 1 month. But you still have to allow for those to lapse. Like, they have to expire or reach maturity. And until they do so, I don't think that they will be renegotiated in a different currency. So I don't know. I mean, we're talking the global economy, so I can't really possibly know how many contracts are set to be paid off or paid back in US dollars that exist all over the world, that like, and what their durations are and how long this will take to unwind. But what this does tell you is that essentially the countdown has begun. That's my honest opinion. That once people see this, and particularly if Russia wins this war, which it looks like they will, aside from World War III and NATO getting involved, well then I think that means that there will be a strengthening, a bolstering of the BRICS alliance and a diminishment of the NATO one, including obviously the US. And if that's the case, if I'm right in that assessment, then that means that the strengthening currency should be the BRICS alliance currency, whereas the weakening currency should be the US dollar currency. So which one would you draft your contract in if you were a seller of goods in the rest of the world? Well, the answer is obvious. You would sell it. You would structure that contract in the strongest currency that you could think of that would be acceptable to the counterparty. Well, in this case, I think it would probably be the BRICS alliance currency, whatever that ends up being. Now, they are still working on that, so like this is why I'm saying there's probably time, but I think that the countdown, the countdown has begun. Is it a 10-year countdown? Is it a 20-year countdown? I'm not sure. I would imagine it's not very long, though. Like, definitely in our lifetimes, you will not see the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency on the planet. That's my assessment. And in the interim, before it ends, I think you will see increasing inflation that we have to deal with for years and years. Now, on the inverse of that, just to spin it, I don't know if this is optimistic or not, but if the Fed chair, if Powell is truly dedicated to fighting inflation and he decides to continue to hike interest rates as opposed to reducing them as the Biden administration would like to see him do, well, I still believe strongly that there is enough pressure in the banking sector, in the financial markets, that you could create a recession that would create deflationary pressure that would ultimately drive down prices and buy the U.S. dollar some time. But will he do that? Does he actually have autonomy? And if he does, is he willing to do that, to bear that cross? I don't know. That's what we'll find out probably in the next 12 months. So stay tuned. Best I can do is give you updates as I see news come in. But the Saudis basically saying, yeah, that deal we've had in place for 50 years, no more. That's a big deal. And anybody that's downplaying it or saying, oh, it means nothing, they're definitely lying. Anybody that's saying that it's the end of the world, probably lying too. It's not the end of the world, but it is a big deal, and it's something that should be on your radar. So I wanted to give you my 2 cents. Now, the far more pressing item, and I know it's a weird thing to follow up the death of the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency of the world with a more pressing issue, but there is actually more pressing news, if you can believe it, and that is the President of Serbia. His name is Aleksandar Vučić, and he gave an interview a few days ago that just left me jaw dropped, if I'm being totally honest. And in it, he's talking about essentially the escalatory trap that I've been describing, and where this is leading, and his timeline on when he thinks this is going to happen. And it was very, very concerning to me. So I want to get into that. I want to talk about why it matters. Obviously, you probably already know why it matters, and whether or not he's right or not. And I think that the reason that we ought to take it seriously is that this is a nation that is actually in the firing line, potentially. He says repeatedly during the interview that he is not interested in, like, they will not be a participant. They are going to stay out, blah, blah, blah. Look, I hope for the sake of the Serbian people that he's telling the truth and that that's actually a possibility, but we'll find out. You know, I don't think that anybody can say definitively if World War III actually happens. We'll see. But this interview is amazing. Take a listen.
Train has left the station and no one can stop it. And it looks like that. And I believe that we are getting close to the last days of possible rethinking and reconsidering of everything that is happening in Ukraine. If those big powers don't do anything in a short period of time, yes, I'm pretty much certain that we'll face a real disaster. If you bet on the fact that someone is bluffing, it means that you have no better cards. But you just believe that the other side has weaker cards, and you're not sure about it because you don't know and you didn't see his or their cards. Everybody is speaking only about war. Nobody wants to reach the peace. Nobody speaks about peace. Peace is almost a forbidden word. And please notice this. Because they say we need to win in order to secure future peace, but nobody's speaking about a peace, and then okay, you negotiate it. But you have the other side, you have to have the other side on the table as well. It's, it's very strange to me that no one is actually attempting to stop the war. There is another theory, which I can understand, which I don't say that I do approve, but I understand that West thinks that they can win easily against Putin. They want to exhaust him in Ukraine, and then they will enter the space, and then Russia in today's territory and shaped like it is today won't exist anymore, and Putin will be overthrown and everything else, yeah, maybe that's possible. But
do you think that is possible? Is it possible to use Ukraine to weaken Russia?
Well, it weakened Russia anyway. But is it enough to destroy Russia and to overthrow Putin? I don't believe so. In today's Europe, they all act like big heroes, but they did not say to their people that they will pay a very big price.
Let's pause it there. Look, first off, Serbia is not a huge nation. It's a population of only 6 million people, but he is only a few, linear nations away from Poland and Ukraine. So, as I said, his countrymen could be in the firing line. And I wanted to play this because I was very appreciative of one political leader in Eastern Europe that's willing to actually talk about this with the level of seriousness that I think it deserves. Because so many of them are so just flippant, just really casual with how they talk about this stuff. I mean, we're talking about the two largest nuclear powers going head to head, and people don't really seem to talk about it, particularly in America. I mean, you don't get any serious conversation from either the American political establishment or the media when it comes to how dire this can potentially be. And not just for the people of Europe, but for us domestically too. I mean, this is really has all of the hallmarks of, true cataclysm. So I very much, first off, I wanted to say thank you, Mr. or President Vučić, who I'm totally unfamiliar with aside from this interview, for voicing your concern. I think it's very important for the world to hear it. I'm super grateful that he was able to speak English so that this hopefully has greater legs than it does, if he didn't. But I think that the interesting takeaway from the first half of this interview is that he's talking about how no one's interested in peace. No one's talking about peace. And I think the unsaid thing there is that that's not true. What he's really saying, if he's being honest, which I think he is he's saying that no one on the other side of the table is talking about peace or is willing to negotiate peace, because in fact, just last week, Putin was talking about a ceasefire and what terms would be acceptable to them potentially. The reality is there's been no partner for peace, is what you hear in Israel-Palestine all the time. And in this case, it's very much true.
And speaking about it, you and all these leaders should do absolutely everything in order to stop any kind of warmongering behavior and everything. Why I'm speaking that we are getting close to the precipice, to the abyss. Analyze the situation of NATO and United States. They cannot afford themselves losing war in Ukraine, which means Russia cannot win. Because, first of all, their political legacy will not exist, or it will be so poor that they cannot allow themselves. Number two, position of Europe and the West, collective West, in geopolitical terms, will deteriorate so much that no one would be able to revive it and to renew it. And number three, it will open Pandora's box for more movements, at least, and hostilities against collective West in the future. But take the other side. That's a nice story for one side. But take the other side. If Putin loses the war, Russia will not exist and won't be shaped like it is today. I mean, when you have these two sides so much far from each other, with their wishes, with their expectations, then you see that everything is at stake. Everything. No one can afford to himself or to itself, to themselves, to lose.
But I think the key takeaway from that ought to be that we're talking about the legacies, the reputations of the Anthony Blinkens and the Joe Bidens and the Victoria Nulands of the world versus the actual existential, like the actual existence of Russia. I don't know how you can weigh those two and say that they're comparable. It's quite clear which side is more existentially at threat.
When you have this situation, that's why I was saying to you, That's why I was saying publicly and not hiding it that we are getting closer to a real disaster. Who is ready to lose 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 10 and 15 million people? Ask yourself. I'm not ready to lose a single man, and we won't participate in that. But it's a question for some other people.
How close are we now to a third world war, a confrontation?
I cannot say a third world war, but a big confrontation, how far we are. I believe that we are not far away from it. Not more than 3-4 months. And there is a danger to happen even before that.
Where do you stand in this whole insanity? Where does Serbia stand in this conflict?
We'll keep peace, stability, and tranquility within the region and in our country.
Well, I like him a lot. I did not like his prognosis whatsoever. So he said within 3 to 4 months. 3 to 4 months would mean this was done middle of June. That would mean September or October is his timeline. Now, I couldn't help but immediately do that math when I first heard this interview and think to myself, oh, I'm sure you're all familiar with the term October surprise. Well, it would be a real easy pathway to say, well, we can't have elections. We just totally allowed Ukraine not to have an election because they were at war. Well, if we're at war with Russia, certainly we can't have an election here in America, right? Now, I'm not saying that's their plan. I'd have no idea. And God, I hope it's not. But I'm just saying, if that comes to pass, I don't think anyone should be surprised. I think that would be perfectly within the playbook, so to speak. So that's concerning. But obviously much more concerning than the November election is, can this actually be avoided? Can this Thucydides trap or just trap be stepped over, stepped around, avoided at all? Because it seems like we've already stepped in it, and now we're just like continuing to funnel billions and billions and billions of dollars into the trap or into the furnace, and no one seems to care. And it's one of the most I don't know. It's one of the most gruesome things I've ever witnessed. I mean, I don't talk about it that much on the show just because, one, it's too heartbreaking and I just don't want to bum you guys out. But it's like, when you hear about the casualties in Ukraine, it's like, it's crazy, man. It's one of the worst wars in modern history. I mean, it's really, really bad. And if you think that's bad, imagine if it's NATO versus Russia all out. And that's imagine if that's just conventional. If it just stays conventional, which I see no way it does, but let's just say by some miracle it does. That's still, we're talking tens of millions of people perish. Tens and tens of millions. I think his estimates were low. I really do. And if it comes to that, well, then you have to imagine that on a conventional basis, yes, NATO probably can prevail in that if they're willing to sacrifice that amount of people. But then what does Putin do? Does he accept his fate? Do the Russian people accept their fate, that just the biggest bully on the block wasn't willing to accept your own bullying? Probably not. And do we want to risk that? And my answer for years now, as you know, because I've debated this publicly, is that no, it is not worth that risk. Really nothing is, but certainly not which tin pot dictator gets to rule over Ukraine. How could it possibly be worth risking humanity for that? I don't think it's worth risking a human for that, but certainly not humanity. So this is his diagnosis. Now, certainly he's got a much more dire outlook than most leaders in the world, and I hope that he's wrong. But I think it's important that it's not just coming from an anti-war libertarian voice like myself, that you're actually hearing it from an elected leader of a serious nation, Serbia. It's like, yeah, it's worth hearing. It's worth tangling with, is Clint just overly concerned? Am I too afraid? And I don't know. As I genuinely hope I genuinely hope I am. I hope that I am overstating this, and that cooler heads will prevail, and that there is an off ramp that someone will take at some point, because there are off ramps, but all I see is Putin offering them and them being dismissed out of hand. As I mentioned just a minute ago, it was Putin just last week that said that, yes, there are terms that they would consider for a ceasefire. Basically, they want all of the Russian-speaking territories within Ukraine to be autonomous. Obviously, they would keep Crimea, and that would be their buffer, and then Ukraine would have to commit to not be added to NATO. So essentially what they demanded at the outset, but with a little bit more territory for themselves, which, given the fact that they're winning the war, that's kind of how wars go. I think it's a very reasonable off-ramp. It's not perfect. It's not ideal necessarily, but it at least would end the bloodshed and turn the temperature down, decrease the escalations. That's what we need. And the fact that Ukraine turned it down within an hour, they turned it down within an hour when they are already drafting people in their 40s and 50s, including the infirmed and the mentally, damaged. I don't know how to say that politely on this channel. Women, they have basically no men in their 20s left. They're literally conscripting men off the streets, and you turn down a ceasefire negotiation within an hour. I mean, you see what I'm seeing here? Like, these people aren't negotiating on their own interest, as far as I can tell. I think that they are 100% taking marching orders from at least the United States State Department, but probably NATO more broadly. And I just think it's absolutely the sickest thing I have ever seen in my life, that you have led these people so far astray, and they have suffered such terrible consequences as a result. And you continue to just put this carrot in front of their face that they're never gonna reach. You're never gonna add them to NATO because Russia will literally never allow it, not without nuclear exchange. So what are we doing here? And it's so frustrating because it was almost 2 years ago, I think it was, or a year and a half ago, whatever it was a long time ago, that I debated destiny on this topic in Tennessee. And I haven't watched it back, so I can't, speak to what was said there, but I think essentially my estimation that this had the real, and in fact, I do remember saying something to the effect of, this has the real risk of escalating to a world war and ultimately nuclear exchange. Nuclear war. I mean, that's a big deal. And I was dismissed, It's always just, just every time someone threatens nukes, you're just going to back down? Well, yeah, kinda. I mean, kinda. I mean, if they're trying to invade America, yeah, I'd probably have a different calculation. But that ain't what this is, dude. And why in God's name would an American be willing to risk full-out nuclear holocaust to defend a government that is corrupt as all get out in Ukraine? Why? And the answer is, there is no reason. There's no good reason. It's all stupid. Unless you could just win easily, but you can't. And now, since I had that debate, hundreds of thousands of otherwise good people are gone. Gone. Does Destiny reflect on that? Does he have any heartache over it? I kind of doubt it. Whereas I, the person that was taking the more sympathetic position to their plight, am now left with feeling that burden, feeling the burden of what more could I have done? Now, granted, a debate with Destiny is not going to change the geopolitical outcome of things, but you never know. Just getting more people in the know as to how corrupt this situation is, how the history of this unfolded. I've done everything I could, and it hasn't made much of a difference. I mean, it certainly is a much more popular topic to talk about. But in terms of actual policy changes, it hasn't changed anything. I think That's the hardest thing about being in this game, is like focusing on such heavy topics, being asked your opinion on them, meaning every word I say, and then seeing basically none of it come to pass. It's like, I mean, this is why I ran for VP, because I was like, all right, let's fucking do something here. Like, this is really dangerous. And unfortunately, this is once again why I was not a fan of the ticket that the LP ended up going with. Is like, there's just a real lack of seriousness when it comes to talking about this issue. Now, you don't have to be the president of Serbia. You don't have to be as dire and somber as he is with it. But I think it's really important that you convey in a serious way that this risk is real, that it's not going away. In fact, it's increasing. In my opinion, it's increasing exponentially over the past 90 days. Even I think it's probably doubled in terms of potential for world war, or at least a hot war between NATO and Russia, which I think is a world war. He doesn't seem to think so. I don't know why it wouldn't be. You're talking about 20 nations versus one, and Russia's going to have some allies get in there too. So it's like, yeah, it's a world war, dude. But anyways, that's I don't know. I'll try and spin this positively somehow, but for now, I just wanted you guys to be aware there are political leaders in Europe that do see what I see, that do see what I think you and I see, and they want to see peace. And God willing, there will be some soon. All right, let's take a break from the heaviness. This was Louis C.K. on Rogan this past week.
But my feeling is they should open it, the border, and just let them pour in, let everybody pour in, and then the answer, which is, well, then there'll be all these problems. Yes, there should be. It shouldn't be so great here, is what I'm saying, in America. It shouldn't be. It's a weird thing to sequester a certain group of people and try to keep upping their lifespan and their lifestyle, and just keep trying to increase that for this group of people. And then this pressure of people trying to come in so they can enjoy it. And then it gets worse and worse down here. I mean, I'm not in Canada. It's really just from down here.
There's so many logical fallacies already laid out in his premise. But I think it's really disturbing, this perspective. First off, obviously, if you believe in family values whatsoever, which, by the way, he is a father, why would you not see the obvious rationale or logic in wanting to better the lives of those closest to you, not to the detriment, this is the other logical fallacy that he gets into, but not to the detriment of the rest of the world, but rather your priority should be those closest to you, those that you love. Why would it not be? I mean, that's a totally bizarre perspective, unless you're some Zen Buddhist, which he certainly doesn't strike me as the Zen type, given that he's describing this in such a dire way. But then the other very strange aspect about it is that it's the zero sum game, or the fixed pie fallacy, where he's thinking that, well, because America is this little cordoned off special little place, and this is such a weird thing where you want it to be special and you want it to do good to the detriment of everybody else. No. There is no reason that it has to be to the detriment of everybody else. It's just that it's not our obligation to also uplift everyone on Earth. They can still succeed. And then there's also this really paternalistic and, in my opinion, racist perspective when it comes to this outlook, in that, oh, if they don't come here and if we don't help them and if our situation doesn't get worse so that we can benefit them, well, then they have no hope whatsoever, which is just absurd, because there's tons of nations all over the world that have done incredible things over the past couple hundred years that America has existed, that have lifted their people out of poverty and increased their standard of living and their life expectancy and all sorts of things. And by the way, their relationship to America, the consumerist aspects of America in terms of selling their goods into America, has been a tremendous boon to their economies and to their way of life and to their lifestyle and their life expectancy and everything else. So on almost every single level, this premise is just a fucking disaster.
There's something wrong with that. That's not a system that's working, and it forces people to do cruel things to other people. There's a lot of people that die so Americans can be safe. They're just dying, weddings that are drone bombed in Yemen because the guy said something that might have resulted in American insecurity. Not even like definite American deaths, but like just so we can breathe a little easier. Folks die. And folks do labor in unsafe places so that we can keep the prices where we like them. There's so much about American life that other people pay for. That's part of it. But also, it's not good for us either. It's not a good way to live in a gated community. If you let folks pour in like any other wave, it'll kind of slosh, and then things will be different. I don't know, like, what'll really happen? A bunch of people, like, will they just come with knives and start killing everybody? I don't think so.
Well, Europe has a different opinion on that, Louis. They've had a bit of an issue with that, actually. Well, first off, I agree with him that obviously the military-industrial complex, I do oppose that, and I think that there is a big problem with essentially being willing to wage war on the rest of the world because of our insecurities. I think that if they're thousands of miles away, we really don't have to worry so much about them. And in fact, if we stopped messing with them so much, we wouldn't have to worry about them hardly at all. And I think that's probably true. But the rest of his thesis there is just disturbing to its core, in my opinion. And I know I still probably have a handful of open borders libertarian types that listen to me, and I apologize. You will not like this segment, but there's a fairly well-known, I think, I don't know him personally, but there was a tweet I read from him yesterday. I think his name is Richard Hanania or something like that. And he's like, basically every argument in favor of borders is that so that the basically the worthless laborers in America can survive, was essentially like his lamentation. And I was just like, dude, what a fucking terrible way to look at your fellow countrymen. and what it struck me as, or what it made me think instantaneously, was like, oh, this guy hates Americans. Like, he hates them. And I think that's kind of the difference, is that because I am not an open borders guy, he probably thinks that I hate immigrants, but I really don't. And I think that's the difference, is like there's actual hate coming from his side of the argument. Like, oh, I want it to be open borders because I want cheaper labor, and I don't care who it harms. I don't care about the construction worker who is barely getting by and he gets laid off. I don't care. I don't care about that. It doesn't matter, because I care about the free market more than anything else. And it's like, okay, I understand the principled argument, setting aside the really shitty tone. I do understand the principled argument. However, we do live under a democratic republic, and these people still get to vote, and they're armed. And it's like, I just wouldn't talk about people like that. I don't know. Call me crazy. I wouldn't talk about my fellow countrymen that are the armed good old boys that are already down on their luck. And you're like, I don't give a fuck about you, dude. I don't care what happens to you. I don't care about your financial struggles. You better learn to code. You better figure it out. Get smarter, work harder, do something else. Like, yeah, hey, that's good advice most of the time. And it's fine advice if you're saying it in a loving way. It's not a good advice if you're saying it from, behind your computer as you type it up for the Washington Post or whatever. It's like that strikes me as, just real disdain. And I think that, more than I love immigrants, I love Americans. And I perceive my loyalty in kind of concentric circles. It's like family, like loved ones, friends, community, associates, people in my state or whatever, and then Americans, and then the rest of the world. And like, sorry, but basically no foreigners supersede Americans in my concern. I mean, and I think if people are being honest, this is kind of standard for most people. It's like when you hear about a tragedy in Uganda or even Ukraine. I mean, I was just talking about hundreds of thousands of people dying in Ukraine. Do you think that that would have a bigger impact on you if I was talking about Los Angeles? Okay, let me pick a city that you don't hate. Dallas, Texas? I don't know. Whatever city you like. Imagine if it was just gone overnight. All the people gone. It would strike you as a much bigger deal than what's happened in Ukraine. Well, this is evidence that you actually maintain the same worldview I do, whether you like it or not. Maybe you don't, but I think most people do. And I just think that there's something really unnatural about this kind of globalist perspective. But really, at the core of it, his argument strikes me as one of self-hatred. Now, let me explain, because you may not have picked up on that from his little rant there. But basically, his argument is, it shouldn't be so good here. That we don't deserve to live well. Now, let me offer an olive branch to Louis C.K. I think he's one of the greatest comics of all time. He's an incredible talent. He's brought so much joy to so many people's lives, setting aside his sexual endeavors and scandals. He's an amazing comic. One of my favorites, for real. But it's just so obvious that he doesn't see value in what he's created, that he has benefited too much, that he deserves to suffer. And I think that this is a pervasive attitude, particularly amongst liberals in this country. And I don't necessarily know where it comes from, broadly speaking. I think for the younger generations, it's because they're second or third generation liberals and they've just been taught this. But it has to have some sort of originating seed. And I don't really know what it is, but it is a really unhealthy one. One that tells you that you don't deserve to be happy. You don't deserve to be secure or safe or prosperous. You don't deserve any of that. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying you don't deserve it, I guess. Like, yeah, we don't deserve to be wealthy, but like, there is nothing wrong if you achieve it, I guess is a better way of putting it. And he doesn't seem to feel that way. He seems to feel like, I don't care. I don't care about what happens to us. We deserve more suffering because of, I mean, he tries to rationalize it by talking about the destruction that's been caused overseas by the American military industrial complex. And it's like, okay, well, I agree that like what they have done is wrong, but they have done it not in my name. They have done it contrary to my protestations. So why should I should now suffer for that? Is that really, so now we're doing collective guilt, which is a weird thing because you're essentially saying that collectives are bad, right? Because you're saying that the American people are not special, that they should not be held to a higher priority than the rest of the world. So which is it? So anyways, I probably didn't need to break this down as deeply as I did, but I just thought it was a very cogent insight into the perspective, into the mind of a shitlib, which it hurts me to say that because I genuinely like Louis C.K. But I think a lot of people share his sentiment, and I think that what's weird is that as we've started to, like, almost everybody I knew in California was going to therapy, and it's like, you're all going to therapy, and you're all more miserable than you've ever been, and you seem to be getting more sad, and it's like, so why aren't you doing something different? And I think that's kind of like the Hollywood, Southern California, New York ethos. It's like you just focus on your own problems and you start to hate everything and everyone, including yourself, and you want to suffer and you want your country to suffer and you want the people around you to suffer to pay a penance for what you have done, whatever that may be. And I don't know how you cure that, but I think the starting point is to get the analysis correct. Drop some comments down below. Let me know what you think about that one. Maybe I'm off base, but I think I'm onto something there. Switching back to more serious news, here is the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, talking about declining the negotiations from Russia.
It's not for Ukraine to withdraw forces from Ukrainian territory. It's for Russia to withdraw their forces from occupied Ukrainian land. And this proposal is a proposal that actually means that Russia should have the right to occupy even more Ukrainian land. all the four provinces that they claim are not Ukrainian. So this just demonstrates that this is not a proposal made in good faith, but this is a proposal that actually means that Russia should achieve their war aims by also expecting, or expecting that Ukraine should give up significantly more land than Russia has been able to occupy so far.
The obvious trajectory of this war is that Russia is going to take whatever it wants eventually, aside from NATO actually getting in there on the ground hot. So you're just dooming them to more bloodshed for what will ultimately be the outcome regardless, which is what we've been saying since this war began. But what's even crazier is that the implication being, well, this is not an offer in good faith. Well, how about the counter offer in good faith, in that you have said repeatedly that the door will remain open to Ukraine, that Ukraine will be added into NATO basically as soon as this war is ended, with Ukraine retrieving all of its land by some miracle, including Crimea, which ain't ever happening. And then you will add them into NATO, which has already been the reddest of red lines stated over and over and over again for a decade plus, that will ultimately amount to World War III too. So you aren't negotiating in good faith. So let's start by saying for sure you're not negotiating in good faith. Now, you can have critiques over Putin's proposal, certainly. You could say, well, he doesn't possess all of those territories. Now, keep in mind, he does possess the majority of all of the territories that he lined out as being the ones that he wants to be not even Russian territory, but rather neutral territories eventually. He also said that they would withdraw, that they would negotiate a withdrawal as soon as the Ukrainian soldiers leave. I think that a fair counter would say, how about we have a mutual withdrawal from these territories if it is in fact going to be a buffer zone? You could make that argument. They didn't make that argument. They declined it right away. You just think that you're the guy. Like, you just think that you have all of the chips. Like, these people really do. And they don't. Like, you may have all of the chips when it comes to your actual sphere, but Ukraine ain't it, dude. Ukraine isn't in NATO. And I don't think it ever will be. So I just don't know when they're going to actually get real.
So this is not a peace proposal. This is a proposal of more aggression, more occupation, and it demonstrates in a way that Russia's aim is to control Ukraine, and that has been the purpose of Russia since the beginning of this war, and that's a blatant violation of international law, and that's also the reason why NATO allies continue to support Ukraine.
I'm not a body language expert or anything, but you tell me, does this during a press conference strike you as a man who's just overwhelmed with his own confidence? I don't know, dude. I really want to believe that these people like go home at night and they go, man, I thought that maybe this could work, but this is not working. And like, they actually think to themselves like, man, a lot of innocent people perish because of this plan that we set out on. This isn't a good idea. But I'm not sure. I think most of these people, I think Anthony Blinken and all these like genuine psychopaths go home and they just go, man, we're gonna win tomorrow for sure. You know, like, and everything we're doing's for the liberal world order, and that's all good. And every country ought to have a right to enter NATO if they want to, and damn the consequences. I really think that's what their perspective probably is, but it's just like it's so detached from reality at this point. I have to hope and believe that some of them are at least second guessing themselves. If they're not at this point, I don't think they ever will. And if they won't ever second guess themselves, then I don't think they'll ever come to the negotiating table. I mean, I think the reason I've been more sympathetic to the Russian argument on this is just that anytime I see a side that's at least willing to talk about a ceasefire, that strikes me as the side that I want to hear more from. And I want to see the other side. Okay, let's, because I'm most interested in peace at the end of the day. As I've said, I don't have much concern over where the actual lines are drawn in Ukraine at the end of the day. I'm sorry. I'm sure some Ukrainians would be very upset with me for saying that. I'm just being honest. I don't much care. It's primarily Russian speaking anyways. Who really cares? Especially if it's going to be neutral territory. That sounds totally reasonable to me. Anyways, setting that aside. But I just don't know. I don't know. I don't know what these people's game plan is. And it just gets increasingly more obvious to me that they don't want there to be an off-ramp, that they want this to be as vicious as possible for as long as possible. And I know that's kind of the military-industrial complex MO, but man, when it comes to this amount of human sacrifice, it really shakes me to my core that it can just be that it's just about money laundering and acquisition of assets and, just a bunch of like, it's just so filthy. And I just don't know how you could live with yourself. I really don't. It's so depressing. Sorry, I'm sure you're depressed too. This has been a heavy episode. I promise the next one won't be so heavy. I'll do something fun. But man, this is rough. Some brief levity with Mika and Joe Scarborough. Morning, Joe.
When we see these pictures of Hunter Biden now, after the conviction, going around hugging everybody, cheering them up, being the one to say it's going to be okay, hugging his father in an embrace that is so moving. The voters who are going to decide this can see into the eyes of these people. They can see them together. They can see the love in this family. This is a man who's been through so much. Look at him now. Look at where he has come. And anyone who wants to beat the shit out of a man who has been struggling through addiction and has come out on the other side, man, that's somebody who is going to gain the wrath of a lot of voters.
They're now going to try and emotionally shame you for not being sympathetic to the crackhead Hunter Biden, who made millions of dollars in shady business deals in Ukraine and China and a whole bunch of nations that are allegedly our enemies. Well, his dad was the vice president of the United States, and he was simultaneously doing as much drugs and as many hookers as he could possibly get his hands on. Well, simultaneously, his dad was the big guy. Come on. And we have to be sympathetic, and this family is just nothing but love. Do you know anything about their family? How Hunter ended up basically sleeping with his dead brother's widow, and then there's rumors about maybe his niece, and I ain't even going there. Joe left his wife who died, and then, I mean, this family is fucked. This family is so messed up. But all you're going to see is nothing but sympathy and love, because when you look into this family's eyes, all you see is love. That's not what I see, Joe Scarborough. And if that's all you see, you come from a really fucked up family, or you have the worst judge of character in human history. And I think it's neither, actually. I think you're just a paid propagandist liar through and through. And that's probably the kindest thing I can say about you, because you're certainly not going to shame me into being sympathetic for Hunter, which, by the way, his conviction on the gun charges, Trump ought to pardon him for it. Said what I said. I think that's true. My guy, Mike Termott, went on Austin's show, and Lisa said, I can't help but think how fire this answer would have been had Liberty Lockpod won the Veep nomination instead. So we're going to play it, and we're going to see if she's right. I have not listened to this yet, so this will be interesting.
I'd like to know, honestly, your opinion on whether you think it is the proper role of government to prevent parents even from drugging their children and sterilizing them before they reach the age of reason.
Chase's position, and therefore our team's position, to start out with what's most important, is that the government needs to lay off of this area that has not been settled in terms of science, has not been settled for in any number of contexts.
How could you
As
do that
you
to
know,
children, Mike? These are children. They have no option to say yes or no.
I'm not arguing with
I
you,
wanna-
Austin. I'll
you're
just
saying that's your
explain.
ticket.
How
I wanna
about you
know
let me
your
explain
opinion,
our
Mike.
position first,
Don't
and then
dodge
you can
me.
argue with
you
me.
You tell me your take, Mike.
I will. And I promised you I will, and I will. Chase's position and our team's position is that it's okay for the government to step in and make sure that you wait until you're 18 for surgical procedures that are irreversible. And Chase's position is that with regard to chemicals, this is a rapidly evolving area technologically, and therefore it's a gray area. Regarding my personal feeling about the use of these chemicals is completely irrelevant, because as a libertarian, I believe that my opinion about what you should be doing with your life and with your children is irrelevant.
Well, let me start by saying that answer fucking sucked, Mike. Sucked. This is, in fact, exactly what people ask me on the convention floor. Will you bend the knee? Will you just toe whatever the party line is when it comes to Chase's camp? And I said, no. And they said, then we're going with Mike. Well, this is what you get. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Go up on long form interviews and say, the party, the ticket's belief is this, but my opinion doesn't matter. But I'm running for the vice president of the United States of America, and my opinion doesn't matter. Come on, dude. Come on. And it's not really a gray area either. There are studies, very recent ones, in fact, very large studies, in fact, out of Europe that have said that, in fact, no, this is not helping, that it is hurting kids. So this is not a gray area really any longer. And if you've actually done the research, then I think you would be much more uncomfortable with maintaining this kind of nebulous position where you're not actually putting your feet in the ground and standing up for what you believe in. And the answer is quite simple. Kids can't consent. Therefore, you cannot have a doctor lobotomize kids because we realize that there is no medical benefit, or as far as I know, there's no medical benefit to lobotomies. And there's certainly no clear medical benefit to transitioning kids before they are adults. In fact, there's quite a mounting evidence that it's quite deleterious. So it ought to be forbidden. Can you do it as an adult? Yes. Should you do it as an adult? Your prerogative. I don't know. I think in many cases, probably not. But broadly speaking, kids no, adults okay. That's the answer. That's what you run with. And if you can't say it just simply, you're going to continue to have this question for the next 6 months, and you're going to make the party and your campaign and your ticket look terrible. And I will continue to point out periodically, I'm not going to talk about you guys very often unless you come from me, in which case it will be all out flame war for the next 6 months. Fair warning. I do not want to talk about you guys. I think that you're an embarrassment, and I don't think you even deserve the press of my show. That's honestly how I feel. But since I was asked specifically what my response would be to this, I thought I'd give it. It's just disappointing, man. It's disappointing because I just think politics makes people such fucking bitches. Like, I don't believe for a second that Mike Termott is cool with a 12-year-old taking puberty blockers. I don't think he is at all cool with that. But he won't just say it. And I think that's cowardly. And I think that's exactly why I should have been the nominee. Because I would have told the truth. Now, you can have a wrong opinion and still tell the truth. But, like, you can't just say, my opinion doesn't matter, dude. You're running for the vice presidency of the United States of America. Will you win? Certainly the fuck not. Not with an answer like that. But you still have to fucking try and have a position and have a well-founded one. Not our team's opinion is this, but also it's evolving and it's gray, and my opinion is also secondary to the ticket, and Chase thinks this, and bro, disaster. And you know what the sad part is the easy way to get through all of this is to just be honest. Because if you're just honest, everyone will understand. If you go out there and you say, look, there's a difference of opinion between me and my running mate. I personally don't think that this is a good idea. And I think that there's real sound evidence, sound medical science, that this is deleterious to children, and therefore I think it ought to be banned. And I know that coming from a libertarian, it's very rare to hear us say that about basically anything. But when it comes to children, that's kind of the line. That's where we actually do put our feet in the ground and say, yes, this needs to be prohibited. I think that's what he believes. I do. But the fact that he won't say it, and the fact that he will try and like soft sell Chase's position is fucking weak. And it's going to win nobody. You're not going to win any of the zealots that want to be transitioning kids from 6 years old. They're going to look at you and go, oh, I see you. You're a cop. You're a Republican. I can see it a mile away. They're not going to like you anyways. So just be honest. Just be honest. No one's going to like you on either side. The other side's going to say, what's this wishy-washy shit? We're talking about kids. You have to fucking prohibit this. You out of your mind? So they're going to hate you too. So everyone's going to hate you. Great path. 270 delegates en route to you, buddy. Oh, man. I hate talking shit about people that I know personally, but Jesus Christ, it's just so bad. Anyways, if you guys want to support my work, particularly since I'm sick, it'd be nice. It'd just be nice if you want to support my work. At Liberty Lock Pod on X, subscribe over there, and I will follow you back. libertylockdown.locals.com. We're doing a raffle. Probably at the end of August, I'll be doing a Rife machine. You do not want to miss that. It's like $5 or $10 a month to be a supporting member over on my locals. And yeah, this device is worth like $2,500, I think, or maybe more. Get in it. Get in the raffle. It's way better than a lotto ticket. I promise you that. I ain't got that many supporters. So highly recommend. And that's about it. And then last but not least, leave 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts, which I'm going to read you a few right now. Thank you guys. CLR7880 says 5 stars. One of the best. Clint has principles and he abides by them and analyzes events with them in mind always. Very rare these days, and it really helps me keep things in proper perspective. Thank you, Clint. Thank you, CLR. We got Lalatoon says thank you. Thank you for having the cojones to speak the truth. Oh, that more men would do the same. Don't ever stop. We need thousands like you. Well, thank you. And we do need thousands. Millions, please. Chris 819 says, worth listening to. Clint may have horrible judgment when it comes to his girlfriends. However, his assessment of current events is very thoughtful and worth listening to. Seriously, Clint, Luke's not wrong. You need to figure it out. Ha, ha, ha. Yeah. Fuck you, Chris. Thanks for the 5-star review, man. Jacobs says, my current favorite podcaster. Although I don't use Apple Podcasts to listen to podcasts anymore, I've been strictly YouTube and Rumble since late 2022. I had to return to this app to leave an incredibly well-deserved 5-star review for my current favorite podcaster and the next Vice President of the United States of America, Mr. Clint Russell. You'll need to listen to the best political show via We Are Change on Rumble as well. Thank you, Jacob. Little guy that gets screwed says, be careful listening to this pod. Clint is constantly speaking out against the evil in this world, spreading the message of freedom. My favorite podcast I listen to. Thank you so much. Cold Point 954 says, thank you, Clint. Clint, writing this while hearing the LP convention recap pod. Do not stop doing anything that you're doing. Your message is just the straight and honest truth about what needs to be done. These other people just using the LP as a third leg of the same political animal by making backroom deals and shafting you because they're just in it for the power and not for the message. Hearing the excitement in your voice when you gave the recap made me excited for you and what you will do for this country in the future. Since hearing this podcast and listening to Clint, I found my political voice, and I couldn't be more in tune with what should really be happening for our country and the world. You reach more people in more ways than you know. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, man. Damn. I've had a rough week being sick and in bed, so those felt good. Thank you for leaving the 5-star reviews. If you continue to do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify allows for them too. I really appreciate it. It helps with the algos. And I'm so sorry that I haven't been putting out more episodes. I was like really committed to doing 2 episodes before I went on Timcast, and then I was just fucking wrecked on Sunday and been wrecked all the way until now. And I'm just barely alive enough to even do this. So I am sincerely apologetic. I really wanted to do more. I plan to do more. I promise to do more. I can't believe I took like over a week off again. It makes me feel fucking terrible. So please continue to listen, continue to support the show, continue to share it around so that people know that this exists. And yeah, we're going to do some big things here in the not too distant future. I promise you that. Peace.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?